In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, would everyone leave by one of the two exits at the rear of the chamber? Officers will be on hand to assist any people with disabilities. May I ask all members who have mobile phones with them to ensure they are switched off so they will not disturb this meeting. Chairman's announcements. The centenary of the First World War. The centenary of the end of the First World War has been commemorated across the county, with armistice services and parades being held in many towns and villages. Our communities have really worked hard to ensure this most important centenary was marked in a dignified way. I applaud all those who have been responsible for organising the many tributes. We paid our own tribute on the 9th of November with a short but moving service at the Stand Easy Memorial. The City and County Councils, together with Leicestershire Lieutenancy, have marked this centenary with a special service at Leicester Cathedral. More than 400 attended this wonderful service, which concluded the work of the City and the County Councils to mark the centenary. I would also like to thank our colleagues in Corporate Resources who again undertook to raise funds for the Poppy Appeal. I'm absolutely delighted to announce that this year £4,775 was raised from their initiatives at County Hall. I am sure members will wish to join me in passing on the appropriate appreciation for their wonderful efforts. Visitors, I welcome to the meeting all visitors and guests and members, and of course anyone who is joining us on the webcast today. Agenda item number 2, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 26th of September 2018, copies of which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed.
Chairman, may I second that?
Thank you, Mr Jennings. All in favour? Thank you. Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda of this meeting. I would wish to declare a personal interest in item 10, the notice of motion on police funding as an ex-employee in receipt of a pension. Are there any more declarations? Mr Poland, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I would also like to declare a DPI in item 10 as a current employee of Leicestershire Police, and as such I will be leaving the room for that item.
Thank you, Mr Poland. Any other declarations? Thank you all. Agenda item number 4, questions asked under Standing Order 7, 1, 2 and 5. The questions and replies are set out in the order paper and will be taken as read and entered into the minutes. I have 3 supplementaries. Question from Dr Einan. You have a supplementary?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I wish to thank the lead member and the catering department for their response and responsiveness to this question. And I would like to ask, are there any plans to both celebrate and promote this change to audiences beyond this council, perhaps to our district and borough councils and other public partners?
Thank you, Dr Annan, for that question. We are at the moment looking at producing a food strategy. So we're talking with districts, retailers, food producers, local cafes, restaurants, that sort of things. And it's not necessarily just about weight. It's about food from field to fork and what we can do to improve that for where we live. And I think it's well worth reminding people that, you know, you don't have to eat that biscuit. It's your choice whether you eat it or not.
Thank you, Councillor Posnick. I've got a supplementary from Mr Welsh.
Thank you, Chairman. With your permission, I'd like to ask my supplementary in 2 parts for clarity. Firstly, can the lead member or leader speculate as to why we have seen a 166% rise in the number of appeals? And the second part is, in the very, very useful table, the second part of my question, it says that we resolve a large number of these prior to tribunal. I just wondered, how do we do that?
Councillor Auld?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the second one first, if I may. In terms of how it's done, it's on an individual case-by-case basis, taking into account the evidence that parents provide, other professionals provide. It is, after all, an education, health and care assessment plan. And dependent upon the individual circumstances will be the final conclusions that go into that. In terms of the increase in numbers, I've been asked to speculate. I have therefore no evidence to substantiate what I'm now saying, but there are potentially three reasons. One is unintended consequences by the Department for Education in the introduction of education, health and care plans, because this situation is not unique to Leicestershire, it is nationwide. Secondly, the use of social media. We have very clear evidence that parents of children with similar disabilities communicate with each other and frequently try to recommend schools. The third is, I think, fairly clear that as our society expands and the quality of our schools goes up, so parents try and exercise greater choice than actually the parameters of making an education healthcare assessment allow.
Thank you, Councillor Auld. And finally, Mr Mear.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to thank the lead member for his response to the question. The background to this question is a tragic death in a road traffic accident of a 12-year-old boy on his way home in the early evenings of 13th of November. It also centres around a cluster of other road traffic accidents involving pedestrians in Loughborough and around that time last month. I want to thank Mr Chairman, if you'd allow me, the response by East Midlands Ambulance Services and the police to the incidents on Meadow Lane. We've always been critical of the ambulance service for the past few years, and I just wanted to echo here that on this occasion we couldn't have asked them to do much more. And the police were thorough and gave the incidents the highest of priorities. Also, Mr Chairman, if you'd allow me, I want to thank the officers of the County Council. The incident was very tragic, but the response that we received from the officers of the County Council was very professional and without fault. Those in the Highways Department, and a special mention goes to Anne Carruthers, who personally called me after the incident, goes a long way to reassure me that the department will look at the circumstances surrounding the incident. Since that initial call, Anne and I have had several emails and calls from other officers in her department keeping me informed of developments, and honestly, as a county councillor, I could not have asked for any more. But I wanted to come on to my supplementary, if Blake would allow me. It's very difficult, Mr Chairman, this incident has been, and the officers have been magnificent, so I can't fault them there. However, I'm seeking assurances from Blake, as the lead member, that concerns raised by myself and local residents who live near to the scene of the accident, that everything that can be done will be done to make that area a safer place for our children. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chairman. And first of all, my condolences, our condolences to the both other people that have tragically lost their life in accidents in November, including the young boy that you spoke about, Jewel. In terms of giving assurances, as you'll see from the response, the department do investigate as to whether there are highway defects that may be a contributory factor towards accidents. In this instance, that doesn't seem to be so, but I can give you the assurances that we do investigate, we do a thorough job, and if remedial works and other improvements are needed, then through the normal processes, those bids will be put in, and we'll seek to ensure that our roads are in the safest possible condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I've no more supplementaries, and I now move to agenda item number 5, to receive position statements from members of the Cabinet. Councillor Rushton, if you'd like to give the leader's statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and can I be the first to wish you Merry Christmas? Before I start on my position statement, can I thank Jewel Mear personally very much for the positive comments you said about the County Council, and as leader, I'm proud that we were able to help the victims of the accident in Loughborough, so thank you very much, Jewel. The first item on my statement is the Empower. So obviously, we're kind of proud of this. This is the second year we've won it. I won't talk about it a lot because Byron, and I want to formally thank Byron and his team down in finance for the work they do in helping us achieve this. So thank you very much, Byron, and I'll let you speak to it. But we should recognise that this is the second year we've run it. We are kind of proud of it. On the unitary local government, there is 3 or 4 paragraphs in here. I don't propose to read them verbatim, but just add to them. So in the paragraph 1, as you can see, we started the scrutiny process following the Cabinet decision, and we then received the letter from the Members of Parliament, which district leaders received as well. Districts resolve, as far as I'm aware, although I'm not a district leader, to stop doing any work, and we decided to carry on. I think it's been in our best interests to carry on, and I thank Simon and Terry and all members who've contributed. And I've been to the scrutiny commissions, and I thought the evidence and the way the meetings were conducted by members there, whether they're for or against the principle of unitary status, I thought it was very good and showed us, if any members of the public were watching on the internet, showed us in a very good light that we do treat these things sensibly and we do, hopefully you'll reach some conclusions and reply back to Cabinet. So I thank all members, that includes my side, Liberal side and Labour side, for contributing to the debate so far. Again, as it says in here, Simon, you've not finished yet. You've got 2 district leaders coming in tomorrow. I shall attend. I can only stay till 1 o'clock, Simon, I've told you that. So we'll deal with the 2 district leaders, I hope, while I'm here. And then if you do need more time to debate the other items which you've got on your agenda, I would suggest doing those in January. There is no rush in particular for you to finish your work. I think it's more important that you do your work and then report into Cabinet your conclusions and views on the process which we've started. And that goes for you guys over there and certainly for my side over here. And they agreed at the group meeting yesterday that that is what we want to do. Now, ultimately, when you've finished your work, I'd like to see what your recommendations and thoughts are, and then take it to Cabinet, and I'd like to then move ahead and develop a business case and a vision document, as Baroness Scott said we should develop, over the period of, say, the spring. It's not going to be a quick job because we don't want to go outside commissioning it. I'm going to rely on John and his team and chief executives and officers here to do the work. So it may well be a little while before I can get it done. I would think the earliest you could get it done, the vision documents and stuff, would be May. Then bring it back to Cabinet. We can then have a look at it and comment back on it. And then, as I've said in here, then send it back to scrutiny again to get scrutiny's views on it. And then ultimately, it should come to a full council at some time in the future. I've not set a specific date in here because I don't want to be hung by my own petard, but the principle is it would be useful to bring it here. So officers of the council moving forward know what the settled position of the members of the county council are. And that would enable members who maybe are on the opposite side of the argument, may be able to get them to be able to vote in favour of it, because when they're here, whether we're a district leader or a county leader, we are all county councillors when we're here, and that's how we really want to get people to think about it when it comes to a full council and vote accordingly. Can I, first of all, Simon, thank you for inviting in the 3 upper tier leaders. I thought they were all good. The Tory leader from Wiltshire, the Labour guy, Hennig from Durham, was very good. And if I'm honest, the Liberal guy from Cornwall was excellent for saying he had to do his over the internet. I thought that he was very, very good indeed. So I presume you'll have written to them, but I just want to record my thanks formally in here for them coming in. And also a lady who must have the patience of Job, Jean Collins, a member of the public who has been to every single scrutiny commission. She missed last week. Hopefully she's coming tomorrow, and I thank her. She's coming tomorrow, most, so she's coming. So I want to formally again thank her for turning up to it. Hopefully more people have watched it on the internet. The commissions in particular, as I said, which I attended, were very, very good. And I'd advise some members who have only been to various scrutiny committees, if they have got time, to at least log on and hear the evidence from the 3 upper tier cross-party political leaders who I thought were were excellent. Moving on to the CCN Network Annual Conference, I was there, obviously, so was Byron and Blake and who else went? Richard Shepherd. I thought it was pretty good. I missed Rishi Sunak because unluckily I ate I think there was some sort of small fish, what were they? Sardines, and it made me really, really ill the next day. So I missed the Rishi Sunak presentation because I was unfortunately locked in my room. But I do know Rishi quite well, and Byron said his presentation was good. And I did have a chance to speak with James Brokenshire about our work which we're doing and to say we're going to carry on, etc. So it was useful. It's nice to go, and I think from a county council point of view, it's actually more useful to us to go there than it is myself, I find, than going to the LGA, because everything's geared up around county councils and the problems county councils have, which are entirely different to, say, the problems that districts have or unitary London boroughs have. On the East Midlands collaboration, I continue, as it says here, to attend East Midlands Executive Board, Midlands Connect, Transport for the East Midlands. There's all manner of stuff that it's important that I attend. So the last one I was attending some meeting here in Leicester, and then I had to race up to Stoke-on-Trent because the Secretary of State was coming and they'd put the Midlands engine on in some really nice old building from when the Potteries used to have a load of money, obviously now haven't. And then we got there, and as we got there, the Secretary of State said he'd been summoned back to London on his way from Birmingham to deal with some Brexit stuff, which, as we all know, is still ongoing. But I do continue to attend them. And if you look later on the agenda, I've got an appointment to make to help me out with some of the plethora of things that I have to attend. On the Leicester and Leicestershire LEP, we do well with our LEP, if I'm honest, and we're not going to be fiddled around with by the government, I don't think, on the boundaries. We'll need to incorporate as such, but I think that's generally agreed will be okay. We're a high-performing LEP. We may be small, but in my view, we're perfectly formed because it is just Leicester and Leicestershire. It would have been a disaster, in my view, again, if they'd lumped us in with D2 and N2, because at the moment we all work well together. That includes the districts, the city mayor, businesses, and the county council. So I'm glad they're going to leave us alone. There's only one problem, and it is at the moment a very, very serious problem, and that's about the business rates retention, the growth money from a couple of the district councils. One, I think, will possibly agree, but we're in serious difficulty with one of the district councils who's asking for far more of the business rates and the business rates growth than, in my view, is reasonable. There was a meeting of the LEP board yesterday. I couldn't attend because it was group meeting. Terry, who's also on the LEP from Blaby, couldn't attend because it was group meeting. Jonathan, who's also could be on the LEP, couldn't attend because it was group meeting. So two substitutes were sent. I think one was the Liberal guy from Hinckley-Bosworth, and then there was Mike Hall from, not from Oadby Wigston, and then Mike Hall from Hinckley-Bosworth. And the guy from Hinckley-Bosworth took I would be fair to say, a pasting from the private sector members on the board of the LEP about his stance to the business rates. But we wait and see what comes out of it, and hopefully compromise will be reached and we can all continue to work together on a LEP that's recognised nationally as being a good little LEP. Social value, again, this is something I've put in here. I thank Terry for her support on this. We're proud to be doing it, and I'll let Terry speak to it because she knows a lot more about it than I do. And then on broadband, again, here, great news, really. We've done really, really well over the years. Successive members have held the broadband portfolio here. At the moment, I can take the credit because it sits with me. So come January, we're getting another 5.63 million, which will help us get to some of the very, very last few. And the very, very last few are very, very expensive. But at least we've got another 5.63 million, and hopefully we'll get to some more of the areas which don't have broadband. Because in my view, if you don't have broadband, it's as bad as not having water, electricity or gas now. It should be a statutory service that everybody should be able to have, because personally I'd find it incredibly difficult to live my life without it. But luckily I'm in Ashby-de-la-Zouch and I've got FTTP, whereas some places like here still don't even have anything better than dial-up. And if you're old enough and can remember dial-up, it was bloody awful. So I'll conclude there, Chairman, and wait for questions.
Thank you, Mr Rushdie. I've got 5 speakers so far. Mr Golden.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll respond on a couple of points and keep it brief because we've got quite a bit of business this afternoon. Don't want to say too much on the unitary status because I think that what's coming out of the scrutiny is interesting regardless of which side of the argument you're on. It would have been even more interesting to have been in the meeting of the Conservative group yesterday afternoon when the leader took it back there and as I understand it has got support of the group to continue despite the concerns certainly from the districts and the MPs and so on. But as I understand it now, the proposal is to work up this business case that would then effectively sit there until some time in the future when presumably the national situation changed or the view of the MPs. So I think there has been some very significant things, and I think that the Cabinet, the initial Cabinet report, now there's quite a few issues in there that need revisiting, whatever side of the argument on. And, you know, I've tried to approach this, notwithstanding my personal views and the views of the majority of my group, that, as he says, we produce a report that is accurate, that is factual, and raises all the issues. And what's come through to me is where it has been done, where they've decided to go ahead and have a unitary system, it's been supported with a huge amount of devolution to local members in their areas to get on and make decisions and have budgets and continue to operate the development control planning system very much as it is in the districts at the moment. And that raises an enormous question of whatever happens in Leicestershire, because actually a lot of those things that were talked about and suggested, there's nothing to stop us doing those as a council now. But we have here, in contrast to what some of those councils told us, actually a very centralised, a very top-down. The majority of decisions are made by the Cabinet. I cited the example of traffic regulation orders, which don't need to go anywhere near the Cabinet. They could be dealt with by a group of local members. And the key thing to me is an acceptance that what might be right for Colville isn't going to be right for Hinckley or Market Harbour and so on. And that's the challenge to that side of the council chamber, whether they can ever be prepared to let go and have a situation where Oadby and Wigston has Liberal Democrat members, Loughborough may well have a majority of Labour members. And that's a significant change, which has a huge question mark over it in my mind. Just on the East Midlands collaboration, I don't know whether the leader wants to think again about what he said recently in the press about this, because I've had a lot of comments from people, as has my colleague, Mr. Bill, about this phrase that was used about needing to take the poison. I think that was an unfortunate quote, and there are key meetings taking place in those district council partners as to how this issue of development and this proposed plan is going to take place. And I really don't think that has helped the process. I'll leave it at that, Chairman. And then finally on the business enterprise, I recognise that the LEP has done some good work, but you know, I did raise, I think it was at the last meeting, the issues around the business rate retention. And the answer I got was you don't need to worry yourself about it. And clearly we do from this side, because all is not well with the business rates retention. And the fundamental issue, in my opinion, what I've heard, is historically where that investment has gone. And I've raised that both locally at district level and at county level. And there is unhappiness and a feeling that it hasn't been spread, the jam hasn't been spread fairly across all areas. And where you look where the money's raised and where it's spent, particularly with regard to the city, there is clearly a mismatch there, Chairman. Thank you. I'll leave it to that.
Thank you, Councillor Golden. Dr. Aitken.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the leader for his report. And I also want to thank all the officers and staff who have enabled this council to be, despite being so low funded, the most productive council in the country. And I'm sure that makes all council members here proud. As far as unitary local government, I also would like to thank Jane Scott from Wiltshire, Simon Hennig from Durham and Adam Painter from Cornwall. I thought that their presentations were riveting, and I can understand why Jean Collins came, and I hope she enjoyed them. And I would encourage anyone who can watch either live or online. I think the online version of Adam Painter's wasn't as good as it might be because he was coming through by Skype. And his was absolutely gripping because I think he really showed, as all three of them showed, that at this stage in thinking about a unitary council, you're not going to get agreement. You are going to get opposition. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I would also like to thank Simon Galton because I think his professional approach to scrutinising this is exemplary. And all the members of the Scrutiny Commission also. When it comes to going forward, obviously there are going to be concerns. Yes, I think we do need to have a product, and a business case is a product. I'm glad it's going to be conducted in-house because there will be concerns about, from the public about the costs of creating such a business case. I think there's also going to be understandable concerns whether or not this can be achieved well without the cooperation of the district councils. And I think with so many dual-hatted members, I do hope that we can get some cooperation from the district councils in creating this business case, which may have to sit on the books for a while, until there is a change perhaps of the Secretary of State, or at least his views. And I also would like to comment on the culture of devolvement. Yes, we do have sometimes a bit of a problem with centralisation here, and it would be interesting if we could perhaps experiment with some of these more devolved ideas going forward while we're in this transitional period. Other points that I'd like to raise, I think with the LEP, I think this has come up at scrutiny before, the importance of scrutinising the LEP. And I know that this came up in the government's recent review of the quality of scrutiny at local councils. And maybe this is something we should address again, if only because many of us haven't a clue what's going on behind all those closed doors. So it might be helpful. Social value, yes, thank you, and I thank the leader for raising this one. There is so much that we can do with our business partners. As an example that I hope will enthuse people, the contract to redevelop the Snibston site, the business there have a great interest in providing social value to the councils that they work with. They take on apprenticeships from those furthest from the labour market in the community. They take on looked after children from councils and ensure that they can get a step on the ladder. So it's this kind of stuff that we can leave out of our partners. So I'm very pleased to see that. Broadband, yes, I'm looking forward to seeing details of the areas to benefit because I think we cannot have people left behind in the digital age. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Riley. Mr. Charlesworth, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few comments around the unitary issue, really. Yeah, I suppose the best case scenario is we get a business case that sits on the shelf until at some point in the future the districts and the MPs actually think it's worthwhile. I don't believe unitary is the ultimate conclusion of this county, but who knows what the future holds. Two things around it. Trust. I mean, we all know, and I speak through you, Chair, to the leader, a little trust has got to be built with particularly Oby and Wigston. Our cooperation over the past few years around highways forums and issues like that has not been good. And if we're going to have town councils and local area planning committees, they've got to be semi-autonomous with a good budget. And yeah, if you can build a case around that and present it, that'll go a long way to helping things along. I mean, at the moment, Oby and Wigston's putting out their leaflet asking about unitary. We won't get the results until the new year, but that'll shape, I would have thought, our views and opinions going forward. it'll have to come back to this council, and at that point, hopefully there's a little more detail. Our group has gone along with this. We have reservations. We don't necessarily believe it's the best way forward, but we are prepared to do the work and the evidence and see what we end up with. I think that's the proper, sensible way forward, and we're quite happy to do that. But certainly, building trust is one issue that we need to resolve. We need to have confidence that, I don't know how it'll pan out, how big these area committees and town councils will be, but if the confidence isn't there before we sign off on it, it's going to be difficult. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Charlesworth. Mr. Bill, please.
Could I refer to the East Midlands collaboration that Simon made reference to? I do agree that we cannot underestimate the importance of these bodies which are mentioned here: Midlands Engine Executive, Midlands Connect Board, and the Board of Transport for the East Midlands. But what is missing, of course, is our ability to find out exactly what goes on these bodies. We do get the general impression given to us, and I get the general impression given to me as a member of the Borough Council, a member of this authority, and as a member of East Midlands Councils. But what we really do need to see is to be able to scrutinise the detail, as Terry mentioned earlier on. And that brings us down to the bottom paragraph on that page. Our old friend reappears, the A46 Expressway, which no doubt has come about as a result of these august bodies considering our futures for us. And I'm sorry to have to return to this again, but I always fear that if we just let a report go through without comment, it will be taken that we are all in agreement with the contents of that report. And as I said before, Chairman, some of us have deep concerns about the impact of the A46 Expressway, not only on the eastern and southern areas, which is often referred to, but on the impact through Hinckley and Burbage, because it will point directly into our urban area, with the environmental impact of that road already highlighted in the Board of Transport for the East Midlands' own report. In other words, it's going to push traffic through the urban area, additional traffic. It will have an impact on the Burbage Common area, and it also, as now will be reported to tomorrow's scrutiny, it will open up all that land between Burbage, Stony Stanton and Sapcut for additional development of some unknown kind. We really do face an enormous amount of pressure on development in the southwest of the county, and we need to know who is deciding this, how is it being decided, and has anybody worked out the impact on the existing communities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bill. And one final is Mr. Mullaney. Thank you.
Are we to understand that the Leader of the County Council's preferred option is still the creation of one unitary authority for Leicestershire, and therefore the abolition of Hinckley and Bosworth and all the other boroughs and districts in the county? And if that is the case, surely he is aware that this is incredibly lacking in support, lacks the support of Tory MPs, lacks the support of Tory council leaders, lacks the support of this group in the county council, and possibly lacks the support of some members of his own group as well. And where public opinion surveys have been taken, such as in Hinckley and Bosworth from the council, it lacks support of the public as well there. And given that the Minister, James Brokenshire, has said that the government will not support any proposals that do not have general public support, surely it is time to drop this plan now. Because if we continue with a policy that we know doesn't have support from a wide range of groups, all you are doing is wasting money in officers' time, wasting money on consultation at a time when the council's struggling. Surely it would be a flagrant waste of public money to continue spending large amounts of sums pursuing a policy which has no support locally amongst MPs, amongst council leaders, including in his own party. And surely it would be a good idea now to say the idea of one unitary for Leicestershire is dead, is over, it's not being considered anymore, because there is no way that it will command public support across the county.
Thank you, Mr Mullaney, for your valued thoughts. Councillor Rushton.
Thank you, Chairman. Simon, you questioned the Conservative group. It was an acrimonious meeting, whether you support the principle or not. I think it is still well worth proceeding, and the group said that it's still well worth proceeding. You've done a lot of work. You report back, Cabinet will look at it, we can commission a business case, can come back to you. It is still worth doing. It's been the elephant in the room for far too many years. That's where I disagree with Mr Mullaney. That's where I am a difference with the members of Parliament, that we should carry on. It doesn't do us any good not to examine it, because people like you keep saying, oh, well, if it was unitary, you'd have 30 million. What we need to do is look at it, develop a business case, and then eventually bring it to full council. I can say to Mr Mullaney, there'll be no budget line for doing this. We will do it from within existing resources, in addition to the work that officers are going to have to do. So there's no cost to it, and I think it behoves us as county councillors to be looking at the principle of this going forward. And if it comes to full council, and we are committed to a free vote on this side, if members of my group want to vote against it and it's voted down, that will be the end of it, I have said, for 4 years. So on the principle, Simon, you're right. You made a couple of comments. Things do need revisiting. You're right, they do. Suggest them and we can revisit them. We do need to take on board what Baroness Scott said, transition, then transform. In our original figures, we're showing a huge saving in year one. Maybe that's untenable. We've got to possibly take everything on board first, have a good look at it, see what's good from the districts and what we can change. So transition and transform is my slogan for it. And then, of course, devolution is absolutely crucial. That came across from all three upper-tier political leaders, that devolution, in whichever form we choose to do, is key. Now, on the expression a little bit of poison, I did personally phone up Neil Bannister and apologise for the way that it was reported. There is no doubt that I said it in conversation, but I didn't say it as it was reported in the Mercury. And I phoned Neil and apologised to him for that being quoted, that members of Harbour should take a little bit of poison. It was quoted entirely inappropriately, and I apologise for it, and I'm happy to apologise here if it has caused members of Harbour any difficulty. Terry, thank you very much for your generally supportive words. Mr Charlesworth, trust, obviously. I know in the past we haven't done that well, and the highways forums were perhaps an example of that. Things will have to change. You're absolutely right. Things will have to change for Colville. Things will have to change for Loughborough. Things will have to change for Harbour. These are the sort of things that the vision document and the business case could work on. And then you lot can have another look at it. And if you've got any suggestions, we can consider them. Mr Bill on the A46, as usual. Well, it's not my road. It's the road that's emerged from Midlands Engine and Midlands Connect. What I can see from it, the same as the members' advisory group can, that it does help deal with the vast increase in housing numbers. Because if we don't have some infrastructure, Mr Bill, all you'll end up with is the houses. That is the problem. The houses and the people are going to come, and the A46, or the proposed A46, was just a swish on a map at the moment, and if it was ever going to come to fruition, it would be the result of huge consultation, because it would be funded by the government. But we do need to be strategic, and we do need to think, and it's very, very hard for me to be sitting here thinking about something which will take place long since when I've stopped being leader, but it is beholden on us as the sitting county councillors to input into long-term strategic planning to try and ensure that we do get the infrastructure that goes along with the sheer vast number of houses and business growth which this county is going to benefit from. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rushen. I now move to the lead member for Children and Family Services. Councillor Roll, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to read this word for word. Everybody here is capable of reading. I would draw members' attention to the second paragraph at the end, the push to increase capacity, reduce caseloads and create a learning environment has been successful in stabilising the workforce, resulting in children and families receiving improved services. That's taken from the Ofsted report and reflects very highly both on the previous director, Paul Meredith, and also on the current director, Jane Moore, and the staff that we go out regularly and meet. It's very good to see in that report that senior leaders know their service well. I read quite a number of reports on Ofsted. That's not a common comment, and I was very pleased to see that. High support, high challenge culture has resulted in staff feeling well supported and safe in their practice. Really important points. So I'd like to take this opportunity to formally record a well done to the service for the work that they've been undertaken over the last 2 years and to achieve such a positive report from Ofsted. I can tell Council that one of the inspectors who came in for that was also an inspector on the long inspection and dealt with the first response. So we had somebody coming back to actually compare and contrast what she'd seen 2 years ago with what she was seeing today. Can't give much detail on the next item on here, but this is, I think, a very exciting development. I have met with the representatives from Barnardo's and with Jane Moore. It's fair to say that Barnardo's are really pleased to find a council that's prepared to work with them to look for cost-effective, outcome-focused solutions, in this case for Leicestershire children. Once again, if you like, we're becoming a pacemaker, and I will obviously in the future come back both to scrutiny and also to this council to let members know how that develops, hopefully with a good story of success. The next two items, New Loversthorpe Primary School, Newlands Community Primary School, members will, I think, be aware of from media releases, and I haven't really got a great deal to add to either of those. Last Friday, I had to receive with Jane Moore Ed Agar, who is the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Ministry of Justice. Unlike many councils, our youth offending service clearly is high quality, and I would think that everybody here would be ready to applaud their success in youth crime prevention, reducing reoffending and diversion from custody. And that success is evidenced through the continued reductions in first-time entrance to the criminal justice system and reoffending rates that are significantly lower than those nationally. So I was very pleased with that. In fact, it's one of those meetings that you introduce somebody to and you step back into the shadows and you let the staff say what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it, and how successful the outcomes are. On fostering and adoption, I had some additional information for members this afternoon. Residential placements. 2 years ago, 14% of children in our care were in residential placements. This year, it is down to 9%. We as a Cabinet took a view that we wanted people in our care in family homes through fostering and adoption as much as we were able to achieve. And I'm pleased with that particular report. Secondly, we had a target set for us for the one-to-one carers and pathway carers that we would be able to recruit 2 carers per year. We're halfway through the second year. We already have 4 approved, 3 one-to-one and 1 pathway carer, and an additional 2 pathway carers in assessment. These people deal with the very costly level 6 children who would otherwise be being placed in residential accommodation, and it is a very, very strong development. I've always said that I listen to people. Sharon Cook, with Paul Meredith, inaugurated monthly visits to different teams who work for Children and Family Services. 2 months ago, we went out to see the Child Protection and Children in Care teams. and they were fairly frank and forthright with us about the fact that they felt they'd lost way a little bit in terms of a change of dedicated business and admin time. So we didn't just nod our heads and walk off and forget about it. I'm really pleased to say to people that the senior team have reintroduced that business and admin time, having staff to have a minimum of 1 day a month dedicated admin time. Care plans, as a result, are being updated from 50% to 70% within the required time framework. And I will finish on that note because I think it records an administration that listens and then acts on what our staff are telling us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Auld. Mr. Sheehan, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I've followed the regular reports on recruitment for fostering and adoption at scrutiny over the many months we've been looking at it. It has been a success story, and I'd like to join Ivan in congratulating the staff involved. Equally, I'd like to congratulate the staff delivering and leading the services at the front door. But let's not forget, demands on these services are growing, and they will need resources as well as leadership. Thank you.
Mr. Welsh.
It's clearly right, Chairman, that opposition parties challenge and oppose and hold the administration to account. But I also think it's right that when we hear news like this, that we recognise that. We've watched very closely at scrutiny the work of this department, and it's quite clear that we're seeing some tremendous effort and tremendous work. And it's quite clear that in Jane Moore, we have an excellent leader of the department. So I want to pay tribute to all of the staff who have worked so hard. The Ofsted results are excellent, and I'm particularly keen, because we've watched this for a number of years, the improvements in the fostering and adoption service. I've been a great supporter of recruiting specialised foster carers so that we don't have to put children in remote care homes, you know, all over the UK. This is the right way to look after our children. And remember, they're our looked after children. They're not some remote children owned by somebody else. We're the corporate parents. We look after them. Let's do the right thing and continue to do the right thing. And I'd like to thank Ivan for his position statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I formally thank Ivan for the good work he does in this department? It's an excellent position statement, and we should be proud of what we're doing. Because if push comes to shove and everything else has to go, we should always remember that children and are our future, and they should be our priority if everything else was failing. So I thank Ivan for the work he does. And also, as Sean says, this does require resources, and it is very, very challenging for us as an administration in the children's services area. But I can promise all members of this council that we're doing our absolute best that we can, but we do recognise it is very, very financially challenging. And then finally, Chairman, can I ask the Chief Executive to formally write to Ed Arger? As you know, Ed is a Leicestershire MP for Charnwood. I thank him very much for coming. He was very, very complimentary when I stopped to speak to him in the corridor, and I think we should, although he's the Minister with this responsibility, I think it wouldn't do us any harm to formally write to him and thank him for visiting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rushton. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo Mr. Auld's words, and I won't repeat everything he said, but I will just like to put some points across about the Ofsted and the focus visit on the front door. I think we also need to remember that these inspectors turned up in the first week of the new director's job role, with her just settling into the role, and she coped with it admirably, along with the members of staff in accommodating the Ofsted and the report. The report that we received back was good. There was still room for improvement. The department are working on there, but as you walk around the department, you can see how proud the staff are to have got this report, to have moved to where they are from where they've come from. They're really pleased and they're working extremely hard. So I just want to put on record my thanks to Jane Moore, the director, Mr. Auld, and also the staff working in that department.
Chair, demands on these services are indeed growing, However, the staff within the department, as well as the very successful efforts from adoption and fostering services, show these results show that our commitment as a council towards our corporate parenting responsibilities. And I want to add my congratulations to the services as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to conclude with what Mr Wells said. We have an excellent director in Jane Moore. She certainly helped me personally with young people, and I'd like that put in on record as well. Thank you. Mr Old, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair, and thank colleagues in the Council for the kind comments that they've made this afternoon. I would like to say that since we set up the social care panel, children in care, child protection panel, that members are better informed, I think, now than they've ever been. I can see heads nodding around the chamber for that. That was originally a little bit of a concern to some people. Did it mean that scrutiny couldn't do its job properly? Actually, it means that scrutiny can do its job even more effectively because they've got much more information and are therefore able to put the awkward questions that otherwise I might not want to answer with a smile. In terms of resources, and I think Sean was right to raise this, it is a fact that by 2020 there will have been a £40 million increase in children's social care over the last few years of the medium-term financial strategy. And I actually count myself, Chair, extremely fortunate to have colleagues on the Cabinet who see the value of early help and prevention. And perhaps one of the challenges that faces this Council is going to be how we convince the government of the need to continue to fund the Supporting Leicestershire Families programme, which the government refers to as the Troubled Families programme, and whose funding is due to run out in 2020. To me, that's an absolutely vital component of preventing acute and chronic activities at a later stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Old. I now move on to consider reports of the Cabinet Scrutiny Commission. Agenda item number 6, report of the Corporate Governance Committee. Mr Bedford, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I move that the proposed amendments to the contract procedure rules set out in Appendix 1 of the report of the Corporate Governance Committee be approved.
Have a seconder?
More than happy to second that, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Richardson. Any questions? All agreed? Agenda item number 7, report of the Constitution Committee. Mr Rushton, please.
Can I move the recommendations, Chairman?
Thank you. Thank you. Of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Mr Rushton.
Chairman, can I again formally move the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel?
In what we've moved, there are several sections here, and one of them is that under E is that group leaders and group whips be reminded of their responsibility for ensuring that all members of the groups complete and submit a second annual report. And that's not actually happened yet. And there are still 3 members who have not done that this year. I do feel that that's very unfortunate, and should be brought to the attention of the Council. I'm informed that Mr Charlesworth, Mr Mullaney and Mr Wyatt have not yet done it. But if they have done it more recently, and I'm ill-informed, and I'm happy to be updated. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Rhodes. Mr Mullaney.
Information I have sent in to Graham, my reports, and just to say I regularly keep in contact with my local residents through newsletters. In fact, so often sometimes they complain I send them out too many leaflets. So there we go.
Thank you. Can we all move? Mr Galton.
I mean, I was just going to let this go through. I thought we were just going to nod this through, but Mr Rhodes has raised the issue of singling out. I mean, as Mr Mullaney has said, this is, in the end, a matter for individual members to decide how they wish to keep in touch with their residents. And there are various ways of doing that. And this group has an exemplary record of keeping in touch with local residents through regular newsletters, which that side of the chamber often joke about and make light of. But that is the way all of my members choose to deal with keeping in touch with local residents, and I would argue that we do a far better job of it than members of other parties. So regardless of what the independent remuneration panel says or concluded, that is not part of this process. It's a separate process, but it shouldn't be forgotten about. Second point I would make is one of my members took the trouble to look at the regulations in relation to the role of the panel. And they go back to John Prescott, some 15, 16 years ago, when they came out, when it became obligatory to have an independent panel look at members' allowances and make recommendations. But having been through those, it says absolutely nothing about preparing annual reports. Nothing at all. So in the end, the report talks about some requirement. There can be no requirement. There's no statute in law. It is a request, but that's all it can ever be. And it cannot be a requirement to do it. So in the end, whatever pressures, whatever question, it is a matter for the individual members to decide whether they wish to submit one. Thank you, Chair.
Dr Inan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wish to put on record the Labour Group's thanks to the Independent Remuneration Panel for their work and for reviewing their work again, as they have this time, particularly the annual reports. I also wish to thank my own group whip. I think we have a good record, generally speaking, as the Labour Group on keeping our annual reports up to date, which we do see as a duty to our public. These people pay our wages. I think that for any member who is providing regular reports in whatever form, whether it's a monthly report or a newsletter or articles to the papers, it should be actually quite easy to do quite a simple cut and paste job once a year to evidence what you're doing. And when it comes to point G, when the panel intend to review the group whip's allowance at the next meeting, clearly the Labour Group will support whatever the Independent Remuneration Panel decides. But we would want to encourage them to see that group whips allowance should depend on their group being able to evidence to the public that their members are keeping in touch with them. Thank you, Chair.
Mr Shepherd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for the avoidance of doubt, as they say, it is worth noting a particular change in wording from the panel last year and the panel this year. For the first year of this process, members were requested, I think, to submit a report. If members here could look at page 57, perhaps, of the agenda in front of us, if they could look at recommendation Roman 3, the panel have actually changed their vocabulary now from requested to required. So notwithstanding earlier remarks, that is what our panel is saying to us, Chairman.
I've got one final speaker, and that is Councillor Bray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it brief. As far as I'm concerned, the only requirement on a member of a county council is to win a county council election. And that is the only requirement on us to be county councillors. Now, frankly, at the end of the day, at the end of 4 years, our constituents will have their verdict on whether or not they think we've done a good enough job of keeping them informed, whether they return us or not. And I personally have got got no sort of... I'm very happy with my record on that, let's put it that way, and I'm sure the members of my group are as well.
Thank you. Mr Rushton, if you'd like to come back.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. First of all, thank you, Terry. As usual, positive comments, and we welcome them from you. For the leader of the Liberal Democrat vote to have to go back to John Prescott to try and just justify what he thinks is right and wrong beggars belief. And it is nothing to do with statutory requirements. This is exactly what the Independent Remuneration Panel have asked us to do, and we should do it. We commission an Independent Remuneration Panel, we accept what they say, and we should do it. And you should certainly do it, and you should certainly encourage your members to submit one. And, Mr Bray, if you don't want to take heed of the Independent Remuneration Panel, maybe you'll take no remuneration from this county council. I think if you're going to be remunerated by this county council for the jobs that we all do, you should heed the rules or the suggestions of the Independent Remuneration Panel. They may well not be rules, but they are certainly recommendations. And if we want to be held in high esteem by members of the public, which we do, we have an Independent Remuneration Panel, whether some of us like them or not, and we should heed what they ask us to do, and we should submit our annual reports. It isn't a big deal. Swallow your pride and do them.
Thank you, Mr Rushton. Let's move on, please. Agenda item number 8. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 8, Report of Cabinet, Annual Report of the Director of Public Health. Mrs Posnett, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is an excellent report that the Director of Public Health has given this year. It looks at two of the fundamental challenges that the health and social care system face in the future. Firstly, the growth in the number of older people, and secondly, the growth in the number of people living with multiple morbidity. That is, people with 2 or more long-term health conditions. We have grown familiar with the impact that rising number of older people can have on demand for health services and adult social care services. Previous reports have focused on the older population, in particular the growing numbers of older people in our population and the gap between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. This year's report revisits some of that data. As the numbers are worth repeating, I'd like to ask you to look at page 70 of the meeting pack. Multimorbidity is, as you would expect, to some extent related to age, but it is more than just age. A consideration of the growth in type 2 diabetes in younger people shows how long-term conditions are becoming more prevalent at an earlier age. In Leicestershire, the total number of people with multi-morbidity is pretty much the same in those aged under 65 as it is in the over 65s. The report sets out that the growth in multimorbidity, rather than age in itself, is a key driver for demand for health and social care services. Getting older shouldn't be seen as merely a burden on services. We should celebrate older people for their huge contribution to all parts of society. However, to reduce the years spent in ill health, we need to promote healthy ageing, as well as providing appropriate services. As such, the report calls for a number of measures which the Director will be acting on in the next year. They're tackling social isolation, promoting social prescribing through the Leicestershire social prescribing model described in the report, preventing and reducing falls, promoting physical activity throughout life, and supporting carers. I would like to move that we support this report. Thank you.
Councillor Auld.
Chairman, thank you. I'm happy to second the report and reserve my position.
Thank you. Councillor Hack.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Director and his team for another excellent report this year, and obviously concur with the information that Pam's already brought to the Council's attention. However, I'd like to focus a little bit on the table on 71, if I may, and that table shows the life expectancy of our population, but also our healthy life expectancy. And while there have been improvements locally in the life expectancy for our male population, our female population of life expectancy appears to have plateaued. We've spoken in the Chamber much over the last 12 months about the impact of moving the pensionable age too quickly for the WASPI ladies and the impact that has had particularly on this group. However, this table shows us already a mismatch between the average healthy life expectancy and the age of when you can draw your state pension. At the moment, there's a national proposal that's sitting within DWP to raise the pensionable age to 68, which indicates, and this is going to be brought forward, a timetable has been brought forward, in line with continuing increases in life expectancy. However, I think we should all be concerned that there's no mention from the department about healthy life expectancy. The national picture is much worse for us here in Leicestershire, which shows that the healthy life expectancy has fallen to 63.3 years for men and 63.9 years for women. Leicestershire appears to have managed to improve our healthy life expectancy, but I'm sure we'll have pockets in our communities where social deprivation and the type of work that people do will have an impact on the overall health of our population here. I welcome discussions in the coming year with officers on the detailed analysis of the data as presented, but look forward to strategies that this authority will implement to help our healthy life expectancy for our cohort.
Thank you, Councillor Hack. I now have Councillor Hunt, please.
I'd like to celebrate the role of old people in our society as well. And particularly Pam Posnett, one of the younger people amongst us, certainly of mind, who came along and introduced us to the summit on loneliness, and that's just what I'd like to say a few words about, Chair. And this was an excellent day. Mike Sands chaired one of the sessions, and we learnt a lot from the Red Cross and from university work across the country. One of the statistics that stood out for me was that loneliness is not a particular affliction of older people, because I'd always had that association, older people traditionally living single lives often, perhaps associated in that way. But it is younger people, more than any, who suffer from the affliction, and that, of course, as we know, has a knock-on effect, not just to social lives, but to their wider health. Just to draw further on that, I've always been concerned that one of the services that suffered most under the austerity that's afflicted local government is the youth service, and in particular the detachment youth workers, who were those people who were brave and bold and skilled enough to go out and meet people who, in the communities, who are younger and had not got the social connections and so on that many of have been fortunate to have. So, with that in mind, I then turned to, well, what is replacing that role of detached social workers? We have a youth service, such as it is, and we have all sorts of excellent professional people across the authority. But perhaps the service that is there to join these things up in some way, I felt, was the area coordinator service that's run from Public Health. And that's referred to in the document, I think, on page 97. Sorry, 98. It's a service that I had trouble understanding to start with, some confusion about roles, particularly also between districts and county, because we have district services which impinge greatly on young people, and we have the county services as well. So I think perhaps in the future, perhaps I could turn to Pam and say it would be an excellent idea, in my view, to have a discussion and a presentation amongst members of the local area coordination service and its links across the county, districts and other county services. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Hill, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just remind Max, not everybody in the county has local area coordinators, which I think is a shame, because I agree, I think it's a very good idea and very effective. And once again, we have another one of the Director's fascinating and interesting reports. I do find them, I think they're a good read if you're just interested in the county being illustrated in a particular way and you're not a counsellor, I sort of bizarrely recommend them to people. They're always illuminating and interesting. And it shows us the challenges that multimorbidity brings for the future. And the thing that stood out for me, this is particularly with older people, I think of my parents for an example, and it talks about treating the person, not the condition, or conditioned in this case. And I guess as the medical profession becomes ever more specialised, they just worry about their little bit and forget the rest of it. And if somebody's got 3 or 4 things wrong with them, the bits often never communicate very well. And I've seen that on a personal level. And it does, you know, you just sort of sit there and think, well, who's actually looking at this overall? And they tend not to. And he does highlight in here the fact the medical profession need to change. And I hope that message gets sort of picked up more widely, that they do need to change and become more effective to bring the best outcome. Because if you turn around and refuse treatment, you should see the look of horror on a doctor's face. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Mr. Parton, please.
I'd like to
Thank you, Mr. Parton. Mr. Old, you reserved your right.
Chair, if I can reassure Max that The impact teams are still available to deal with antisocial behaviour, and that when we were at our most successful with the old youth service, no more than 18% of the youth population ever went to a youth club. And in fact, when we started, it was down at 12%. I think, for me, when I read this report, and I would like to give a tribute to Mike Sands, I think the reports that he and his team produce are of incredibly high quality, particularly when they are doing a strategic needs assessment. It's paragraph 5, builds upon my colleague Mr. Parton's comments, healthy and well-being of ageing. You might say I should have declared a personal interest, Chair. I couldn't possibly comment. But I do know, for the division that I represent, which is a rural division, that there are many elderly people who are socially isolated. I do know of the community networks who are out there helping them. I think it's common sense that if we can reduce falls, we should do everything we can to actually do that. Where I am concerned is as I understand it, the reduction in physical activity in Leicestershire in terms of physical activity for all generations, not just the elderly. So I would recommend this report to the Council, and I think we should be very grateful we've got such a good person in charge of our public health. Thank you.
Mrs. Posnett.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all for your supportive comments. They're very welcome. And yes, Mike, so I'm sure we can do something along those lines. In fact, there is a member briefing coming up shortly about health, so they're things that we may be able to discuss at that. And thank you very much, Ted, for attending the conference and the remarks that you've made there. Very well timed, very well meant, I know. And I look forward to seeing you all at the member briefing where we can perhaps discuss these things in more context. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favour of the report? Thank you. Move on to item B, Annual Delivery Report of the Performance Compendium 2018. Mr. Rhodes, please.
Yes, Chairman. Well, I move to move the motion on the order paper that the Annual Delivery Report and Performance Compendium 2018 be approved. Each year we bring this report to full council. It's compiled for us by a very assiduous officer, Mr. Andy Brown, who does a very thorough job. This year 123 pages, extremely thorough report, and much of it is a good news story. But he doesn't pull any punches. Where we don't do so well, he records that as well, and he explains it in great detail. He also mentions and it's on page 109 of your books, if you'd like to look, he makes a reference in paragraph 15, this is of the covering report, into the assessment into our performance been made by Impower. And last year, he records that when they did that, their conclusion they reached was that we were the #1 best performing council in the country. This year, they have updated their report, and I have their little booklet here, which they've published, where they bring forward the 2018 rankings, and we're #1 again. And just to clarify what that means, because it's received quite a bit of publicity, they look at the quality of service and outcomes in fields like children's services, older people, all-age disability, health and social care, housing and homelessness, and waste and recycling. And of course, because we're in a two-tier county, some of those outcomes are contributed to, and some, in fact, very significantly so, by the district councils. So when we refer to Leicestershire, it tends to be the performance of the whole local government in Leicestershire, of which the county council, being the principal player, delivering more than 80% of local government services, is the leader. In children's services, we certainly take the lead in a certain amount. There are contributions made by the districts, but they are small compared with the contributions that our officers make and our organisation makes. And same thing for older people, all age disability, health and social care. Housing and homelessness, it more goes the other way, where the districts, of course, have significant responsibilities, and waste and recycling is more balanced. Now, what this Empire report says, it says we're not the actual top deliverers in any particular section. And now the reason for that is essentially because we don't have the resources to get the top outcome in any particular section. Children's services, we've just been considering, for example, we're 16th out of the 150 areas considered in the country. That's pretty good. We're 12th for older people, 18th for all age disability, 7th for health and social care, 12th for housing and homelessness, only 30th for waste and recycling, all of which, of course, are in the top 20%. But when you then consider the resources we have, because we are the lowest funded county council in England, and by the way, our district's funding is not as good as other districts in other parts of the country because they're affected by similar formulae. And then you balance the two things together, then the outcomes overall for Leicestershire, balanced against those, show that we are the most productive and efficient local government council system in the country. And that is something we should be proud of, all of us. And that's every single member in the chamber today. So when you come across disparaging remarks in Twitter, which have been drawn to my attention, you might like to think that they may be challenged, because we have nothing but pride in what we're doing, because we are doing better than others. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. And much of it is because we have tackled the whole problem of the reductions in funding over the years, since 2009, 2010, in a constructive and totally unremitting way. We've conducted a thorough and totally comprehensive review of every procedure and every practice and every policy we use in this council to deliver services and to get outcomes. We've analysed every process. We've had a transformation team that's been working for years to do this. And because of that, we brought our costs down to the lowest costs in local government. Now, if we'd not done that, we would have gone down the same route as other authorities who are now complaining that they don't have enough money. Now, we don't have enough money. If we had the same funding as, say, some of the London councils, which are also mentioned in these papers, we could be number one in every single area. We could be the best children's services deliverer in the country. We could be the best for older people. We could, and so on. And I look forward to the time when fair funding comes in, and the details of this are going to be announced in 2019, when I hope that we will then start to see a future where we are funded at a more generous and more appropriate level to enable us to achieve those objectives, so that in the future when these reports are brought, not only will we stay as number one, but we'll open up a distance between us and number two and the rest of the country. So I move the report, and I hope that it receives a unanimous approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Shepherd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to second that. I'd like to mention first the officer Andy Brown, and to pay tribute to the work that he does in bringing together this annual report for us all, which is an excellent compendium and gives us a very good document to which to refer as we reflect on what the Council has been doing. I'd also like to mention Byron Rhodes, because it has been by the unremitting effort of Byron Rhodes himself and the team he has led and inspired over the past years, which has enabled this council, that's all of us, to achieve what has been achieved. So we owe to Byron a tremendous debt of thanks, his unremitting focus and his team leadership. Like Byron, I really want to link this report with the Empower report and to think, what is the fundamental message we should all of us, regardless of party, be conveying to our constituents? What exactly is it? What does that phrase, the most productive council, actually mean to people who may quite genuinely be dissatisfied with particular elements of the service they receive? And as Byron said, Andy pulls no punches. There are some high points and there are some not so high points in this document. And the answer is, putting it in my quite simple layman's terms, is we can assure the public that we are getting the most possible value we can from their money. People often say, don't they, it's an old saying, people pay their taxes in anger, so taxes in sorrow, I beg your pardon, taxes in sorrow, and their rates in anger. People look particularly at local council and say, what am I paying my council tax for? Well, the answer is, although elements here could be better, we are getting the most value we can from taxpayers' money on their behalf for them. And I hope that's a message everybody in this chamber can feel they can convey to their constituents. So what does the future hold? In essence, as Byron has said, think what we could do if we had the level of funding which would be fair to Leicestershire. And by Leicestershire I mean all the people who live in this county. A great deal more, which is why I hope we can all also unite behind the continued effort on the Fair Funding campaign and convey vigorously to our MPs and to the government the importance of that fair funding review. So like Byron, I want to commend this report to the Council. I hope we can unite in receiving it and unite in recognising exactly what it is telling us and what lies behind that phrase, the most productive council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Miss Newton, please. Miss Newton?
Sorry about that. First of all, I just would like to say that that conference on loneliness was excellent. I didn't want to get up earlier and say, but what was really interesting was the role of social media in leading to loneliness in young people. And I just wonder, Ivan, at some stage, if that could be picked up. They live very isolated. I just really wanted to speak to page 143, which is the social care pressures in the report. We all know that social care is in a perilous state, underfunded with a lack of sustainable funding model. The government has continually underfunded social care during a time when we have seen demand increase, with more of us living longer, with increased need for social care and health. This leaves us with a system that is actually bursting at the seams and unable to cope with providing support for the most vulnerable in our society. It also leaves our hospitals at full capacity on a regular basis, as individuals who should be discharged to receive care and support in the community are actually taking up a valuable hospital bed. This ultimately impacts on the functioning of a already overwhelmed NHS, but ultimately on the individual. The other area of concern is the impact of Brexit on the provision and delivery of the social care system. As we know, a large proportion of those working in the care sector, which is both demanding and low paid, are individuals from the EU. We already experience a decline in those from within the EU working in this sector due to the uncertainty of their futures. The current high levels of vacancies will be further compounded with Brexit, leading to further issues around recruitment and retention. We have to be concerned for our most vulnerable in society as the impact of this gap in funding on the delivery of care services. I'd like to leave you with a quote from the King's Fund. But it, government, has failed to protect adult social care from unprecedented cuts in spending, and the number of people getting publicly funded social care has fallen by a quarter despite demographic needs which are growing. If reductions in this scale continues, it will be difficult to see how the social care system or the NHS will be sustainable in the current form. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Inan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to thank the lead member and, of course, all our officers and staff. We are rightly proud, and I'm sure all of us are proud, to be recognised as a most productive council, despite the lack of funding. I'm mainly going to focus on the scrutiny comments and on the impact of austerity, though I would like to mention local area coordinators, which we also discussed, and I would like to support the request for a briefing, and I think it's going to be important going forward to be able to evidence their effectiveness, and I think with Councillor Parton's comments about committed community politicians, I think the evidence that they are working with their committed community politicians might be evidence of a more devolved way of working in the future, as was mentioned earlier. But to come back to austerity, taking some figures out of the report, Chair, crime, the total is up by 17%, violence and injury up by 24%, homelessness up 34% nationally. The cost of providing statutory care for our looked after children is to increase by 12 million between 2018 and 2022. And I heard, unfortunately, on the news today that 515 children in the East Midlands will be in hostel or temporary accommodation this Christmas. In our own report, we mentioned that there are difficulties for employers wishing to recruit people with what they call the right values for care work. Austerity isn't just about our budget. It's about the budgets that regular people are having to live within. Since 2010, only 1 out of 40 jobs has been full-time. And many employers have spotted that there is a sweet zone between the lower earnings limit and the primary threshold at 15 hours per week at £7.83 an hour, where they can avoid paying national insurance. This is adding to austerity. It's reducing government income. It's expecting people to live on half the minimum wage, because once you have your 15-hour job, it's not that easy to get the others. And the government have removed what many of us called an employer's subsidy, the working tax credit, which has reduced the personal spending power of the poor and pushed our economy into the doldrums. So workers, yes, they need to have the right values, but that may be because they are needing to care for their families first. And back to austerity. If you find it difficult to get a legitimate income, you may become homeless, adding to the burden on our budget. Or you might seek an illegitimate income, straying into low-level crime, adding again to the burden on the public sector. So I wish to stress here the government is making an impact on our budget. There have been little or no efforts from this government to rein in the food, the gambling and the drink industries. There have been cuts, however, to public health funding for addiction services, obesity service, prevention of diabetes, and supporting Leicestershire families. And I would definitely support Councillor Ivan Old in that campaign. So for our own budget, we are having to make £9.7 million savings in adults and communities. The Labour Group sit on the Transformation Board, and we are proud to do so, because across this country, Labour councils are facing exactly the same challenges and are having to make the same unpalatable cuts. Even well-functioning unitary councils like Durham are having to make cuts because they aren't savings to the public, they are cuts. And when they hear terms like promoting independence as the means to make those savings, they will hear that we're saying, sorry mate, you're on your own. And they may believe that that sorry is hypocritical, because austerity started not with this party, but with the Liberal Democrats in coalition with the Conservatives. And it has been continued despite economic advice that it would slow recovery. So it is, I'm sorry, the Conservatives have also spent 2.5 years because they asked the country, do you want to leave Europe? And some of them said yes. So we spent 2.5 years faffing around with Brexit and failed to deliver a green paper on social care, which fortunately the Local Government Association, working in a cross-party manner, have produced a very excellent document, which we have discussed. And I'm sorry to have to mention here in this council that it is Conservative MPs who, when they go to lobby James Brokenshire for on behalf of Leicestershire, do so with the direct intent of undermining the leader of this council. So, Chair, to finish, I wish to praise the officers and staff of this council who have kept this ship from foundering, despite heavy weather whipped up by incompetence at Westminster, and I will wish to assure members in this council that Labour will continue to support efforts here to keep services going for the people of Leicestershire until there is a change of heart or government.
Thank you, Dr Heinen. Mr Bolter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've read this report from cover to cover, including all the back pages. It's much better than the last one. It's got a few warts in this one. The last one didn't have any warts. But I just focus on just a couple of things. I'm extremely concerned about the Help to Live at Home service. It's gone down from 65.3% satisfaction rate to 58% satisfaction rate. And in my own division, I know there's cases there of people not getting the care that they should have. I'll just relate very briefly. One lady was left, she was put to bed at 7:15 in the evening, and she wasn't visited again till over 10 o'clock the next morning. An awful long while to stay in bed without any breakfast. Another gentleman, his carer didn't turn up to give him his dinner. The reason, that carer was ill and we couldn't supply anybody else. Nobody else could go to him. Now, they're just two very brief instances. That's happened all in 1 week. Multiply that the number of complaints I get over the service, and it is bad. And I hope that the administration does something about it. It's gone downhill since we went to the few contractors we've got now doing the service. And that's bared up by the figures we've got before us. So that's the first thing. I've asked people to complain directly to the officers about it, so I'm not involved in any discussions, but I've asked them to complain to the officers directly about the companies involved. We come to the next important thing, and it's referred to a bit in the annual report, but to me, it should be the most important thing, and that's the environment. It is not down here as a separate statement, and I thought the administration should really take this to heart. Mr Rushton was reported in the paper, I think it was yesterday, about the LEP, sets out plans for a greener future. Now, if he really believes in that, he should follow that through here. Now, with some bits here that we've started on the journey. But only just started. You're taking kicking and screaming to get the LED street lights in place, kicking and screaming to get the LED, get the other energy efficient things on the panels, roofs here. Biomass boiler, yes, that's gone down. But I was on the employment committee, and Mr Rhodes was reluctant at the beginning and to go down to the business miles to get those cut, but he joined in the end, and we got business miles that started being reduced now. His predecessor, Mr Sprayson, was one who really resisted it, but we won't talk about past people, else we might go a bit further and talk about a past leader. So we started on a journey, but we've still not gone far enough. If we really believe in the environment, we should do something about it and make it one of the top priorities of this local authority. After all, I think you've all got children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, for instance, and it's your future you're leaving for them. We look at air pollution. 35% of the air pollution, I believe, is caused by vehicles. You know, look at our own fleet, look at what we give to our officers for their mileage we pay them? Do we get, you know, is it based on the engine size of the vehicle? Is it based on emissions? I don't know at this time. But that's one thing we need to look at. But there's lots of things we can do without costing an absolute fortune. But Mr. Rushton's already signed up to a document, according to this newspaper argument here, that he says that realising this ambition will require vast investment and potentially create thousands of jobs. Now, you know, proof of the pudding's in the eating. I look forward to the report. I shall support this report this evening because it's a step in the right direction. But it's only the first step on a very long ladder. But I urge the Cabinet to think more about the environment and what they're doing at the present time. We look at recycling rates. We are not recycling all the plastics at the minute, as Mr. Payne well knows, and that was brought up at a recent Environment Scrutiny meeting. The reason being, it's not economic to do so. It might not be economic to do so in monetary terms.
Mr Bolter, can you conclude? You've had your 5
value
minutes.
terms, for the people of this country, it's vitally important to recycle as much as possible. And things like the park and ride aren't beneficial in monetary terms, but still continue to put money in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I've got Mr Payne and Mr Bill, and then I will draw it to a conclusion. I'm Mr Sheehan then, and then I will draw it to a conclusion. Mr Blunt.
Mr Bill.
No.
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned adult social care on 3 occasions here, starting with Betty, delayed transfer of care. We've done amazingly well on that, really well. It took a huge amount of kicking from the government to make the process go along, but we actually now can be proud of how we're helping the NHS. If you look at the figures now, 90% of the cases where it doesn't go wrong, where it doesn't go right, is because of an NHS problem, not because of us. So we've responded really well there, and I'm really pleased you've given me the chance to say that. Dr. Ireland, a couple of things really. I mean, preventing illness. You might say that it seems clever to say that we're going to stop people getting ill and needing help to save money. That is actually what we're doing. Anybody who attends adult social care, the scrutiny, will know that every single time we're looking at clever ways to help people stay independent longer. This will always be a service that's in crisis. That's the nature of it. You cannot deal with the pressure that we have. Just a couple of positives there. I think the bit about the LGA Green Paper, I'm glad that was highlighted. That is an amazingly, it's the best thing I've ever seen the LGA do, actually. And that sounds a bit dismissive, but they actually decided to do what the government have been unable to do. My personal preference is that anybody over 40 should pay a levy for adult social care. I think there's a real logic about that. There's a real problem that people under 40 are the people who are not getting on well enough in the way the society works at the moment, and over 40 have generally got the ability to contribute more towards their adult social care coming forward. But that's just a view that came through that green paper. Just finally, on the Help to Live at Home, Councillor Bolter, we get obviously a very important job to help support people in their homes. The nature of the job, if a new Tesco's opens in a community, half-hour workers will apply to join it because their wages are of a similar level. So we're always under pressure. There's no doubt at all, as long as we are here as councillors, we'll be fighting that. But I would say to Councillor Bolter, don't just tell your residents to contact an officer. Tell you, and you email me and I'll help you, because it'll help me learn as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bill.
Page 109, Economy and Transport. I know I've referred to this earlier on this evening, but it does reappear. I wasn't able to attend the Scrutiny Commission on October the 31st, but when this matter came before us at E&T Scrutiny, I did raise a couple of issues which do not appear to have been carried forward into this report, and therefore I feel obliged to refer to it again. In the yellow pages, it talks about the strong economy. I do recognise this. This was challenged by one or two of us at that meeting, where we talked. We questioned the growth plan then. We questioned the enabling growth plan, and further on how it actually translates into the housing infrastructure bid, which we'll be discussing tomorrow. There's a reference here to the need for 190,000 houses up to a certain date, and that is being taken as read by this authority. But there is an argument being put forward that if you look at the latest Office of National Statistics figures, then there is a tailing off after the current period ends. In other words, the exponential population growth that we have been experiencing up to now and into the immediate future might not necessarily continue further into the future. Now, these figures have been put forward by the ONS. They've been challenged by, or not accepted by the government and not accepted by this authority. But this does bring into question whether, in fact, we are over-providing. And if we're over-providing for housing, we could be over-providing for industry as well. And as I said earlier on, the impact of this is not going to be felt in 20 or 30 years' time, but it is going to be it's going to impact on us now, and it's impacting on us in southwest Leicestershire and in the Nuneaton area, because we have a tremendous amount of industrial and housing development in the pipeline. We're not waiting 20 or 30 years when all this will come into fruition, but it's happening. It is happening now. Farms are being packaged up for sale. Land is being packaged up for redevelopment. So it's happening now, and I do question whether we should be quite so ambitious, if you like, if that is the word, to cover our countryside with quite so much tarmac. Chairman?
Thank you, Councillor Bill. And finally, we've got Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, Chairman, you've been urging one or two members to get to the conclusion, so I think there's enough been said. I'm just going to skip straight to the conclusion, and that is this. Prolonged austerity applied to demand-led services inevitably leads to systemic failure. Systemic failure is both expensive and unnecessary because austerity is a choice. Ending austerity is more than a choice. It's a duty of care. I've said this before. But also, not ending austerity, I'll get it right in a minute, takes neglect, poverty and strife and institutionalises it. Do we want that to be our legacy? Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. And sorry, I do have Mr. Payne. I missed you out the corner of my eye, young man.
What a pain I am. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I wasn't going to speak to this report, but actually I'm pleased during the debate I've decided to raise a few comments, not least just because at the beginning of today's meeting you would have noticed in the members area an exhibition by the department to do with winter gritting. We mentioned that in the comprehensive position statement I offered at the last full council meeting that we were going to put this on, and I hope as many of you have benefited from that as I have, and you can take the assurance back with you that we are well prepared for this coming winter season, and I'd like to thank the department for putting that on. What I want to speak about, Mr. Chairman, is two things. A, the highways part of the department that I lead. From page 129 in the annual report, there is just page after page of really good news stories. I gave a comprehensive position statement last time round, so I'm not going to draw out some of those aspects, but I think there's a really good story to tell, and I'm very proud as lead member that we've achieved so much within the year, with a particular focus to people. Now, just in response to Mr. Bolter, because it wouldn't be fair of me to allow Mr. Rhodes to conclude and try and take on some of these points at the end, it was stated that there wasn't a clear section or a separate section to do with the environment. Well, that, in my opinion, is incorrect. On page 174, you'll see there's 4 or 5 pages solely dedicated to what we're doing towards the environment. And the leader signed up to, the County Council up to UK 100, which is an admirable ambition to reduce CO2 emissions. You'll see on page 176 under reducing greenhouse gas emissions, We've reduced, as a council, 34% since 2017. 55% greenhouse gases since 2017. That is immense. That is huge. That is something truly to remark about. Our target up until 2020 was 34%. We're making great progress in the area. We've got a long way to go, which is why we set up the Environment Strategy Board, which is pointed out on page 174, which cuts across a lot of areas of this council, including property, my department, the Environment Department. We have a focus which is going to be chaired by Joe Gull, the Assistant Director of the department, to really get a grip laterally with our environmental obligations. And I believe we've started to make progress. We've got a long way to go, but we are committed to improving the environment and making sure that we leave Leicestershire in a better place than when we started our positions as county councillors. So I just wanted to draw that to the county council's attention. Furthermore, can I just point out in context of our expenditure, it always strikes me on page 187, you'll see we have, as a county council, expenditure per head of £677 compared to the top expenditure of £1,182. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable what we do, not just in our department, or the Highways and Transportation and the Environment Department, but across the whole council with the limited funds that we've got. And to be able to make a choice to decide to focus on the environment when other authorities, it's the first thing, if you like, that they cut, I think we should be exceedingly proud of, and I wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Payne, and I conclude we've got an excellent director in charge, Boydan Carruthers. Mr Rhodes, please.
I would certainly agree with you, Chairman, on that, with that comment, as I agree with you on many things, of course, as you know. Look, we've had some very, very useful contributions in this short debate, and particularly I welcome the heartfelt contributions from Ms Newton and Dr Rynan, who I think feels very strongly and firmly about social care and about health issues and so on. And I do hope that in the case of the comments made by Ms Newton about the recruitment of people into these fields, that we will see a continued flow of people coming. It's certainly, I mean, Brexit is something which has only been mentioned once this afternoon, and we're not going to solve it in this chamber, although I think we probably do a better job than some other people could. But hopefully that will be an outcome which will see sufficient people being available to carry out the work that's needed. Sadly, Mr Bolter, his cup is always half full, half empty. Mine's half full, and can't find very much to say which is positive about this. But anyway, I'll pass on to the very strong contributions made by my colleagues, Mr Blunt and Mr Payne, who sterling defence of their portfolios, and Mr Bill. Mr Bill, who doesn't want economic development. Well, it seems that way to me. It seems that way. That's the way it comes over. And as for Mr Sheehan, well, wouldn't it be nice that where we all had plenty of money and there was abundance and there was no debt and we could spend anything we wanted on anything we desired? Maybe if when we come out of these present difficulties and we get another general election, an election of a strong Conservative government, we will see that Helison future emerge before us, and I look forward to that. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
On that note, members, can we move it? All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 9, appointments in accordance with items 11 and 12 of Standing Order 4, to appoint a Cabinet Support Member. Mr Rushton.
Formally deal with the moving of Trevor Pendleton as Cabinet Support Member until the annual meeting of the County Council, as provided for in Article 7 of the Council's Constitution. I wouldn't normally elaborate, because we've discussed it as a group and we think Trevor will be a good appointment. But I just want to explain to the Liberals in particular, who seem to have a policy of not supporting Cabinet support members, why I think it's crucially important that we appoint someone to this role. And the main reason is it's HS2. So as a Cabinet support member for HS2, and he'll be reporting directly to myself, Trevor will represent the Council, both directly with HST Limited via regular engagements meetings and with East Midlands Councils in their work to deliver on the East Midlands Council's HS2 growth strategy and the wider objectives of maximising the benefits of HS2 for our region. This work will entail supporting and or representing me on East Midlands strategic and executive boards, which both meet quarterly, as well as attending those sub-boards which cover topics of mitigation, skills and total delivery. As you know, or you might not know, whether you agree with HS2 or not, at the moment, as far as we're aware, it is coming, and we need to get someone in the room at these meetings. And there is a plethora of them already, and they are growing. We need to get someone in there who represents us, who represents the County Council, to make sure we get the mitigation that the residents of North West Leicester in particular will require, but also ensure that we get the economic developments that come along with HS2 that, say, areas like Loughborough will benefit from. So it's really, really important that we get him in there. Trevor will be supported by the HS2 team, which is currently being set up in the E&T department. As members will recall, Cabinet approved an additional 400,000 at its meeting in October to resource a team of 3 officers to ensure Leicestershire works to minimise the impact of this significant infrastructure project through the county while maximising economic benefits. Trevor will be reporting on HS2 matters regularly to Cabinet colleagues and subject to diary, and I did offer this myself last night at Packington Parish Council, he'll be able to attend Parish Council meetings as the County Council's representatives when local concerns about HS2 are being discussed. Now obviously down in Harbour you don't get many questions about it, but up where we are, and I know it's part of Leicestershire, it is a big deal. And we have got to get someone in the room. And in all honesty, with my diary commitments, I could not guarantee to be in every meeting where this is discussed. So what I've said to John and to Trevor is wherever I get an agenda, if something mentions HS2, I want Trevor there so he can see the whole piece of what's going on. And it isn't just us that are putting money into HS2. We've put 400,000 in. North West, a smaller authority than us, even they are putting £100,000 budget aside to deal with the effects of HS2. So I say to you, Liberals, please don't oppose him. He's being put in for the best possible reasons. And if you look at the record that Trevor has had when he's chaired the MAG on behalf of the district councils, I don't think a better person could be picked. And also, out of all the divisions in Leicestershire, Trevor's will be the most effective. So please support Trevor in this post. I think it will be beneficial for Leicester and Leicestershire. Thank you.
Mr. Sheehan.
New information, really. I've been surprised by this discussion on HS2 that suddenly started. I need to know if I need to declare an interest.
Sorry about that, sir.
It's a matter for you, Mr. Sheehan, but I think generally you do declare an interest on HS2 matters, so I would suggest that you follow your normal practice. Thank you.
Mr. Blunt. Mr. Coxon.
I was just trying to explain why the administration thinks it's important to have Trevor in post. As I said earlier, we could have just passed it, but I wanted to explain to other members of the council why Trevor in particular.
Mr. Shepherd. You...
Second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very sensitive to the concerns of North West Leicestershire, not just our leader, but our esteemed colleague, Sean, and of course Trevor, all excellent members. And I do appreciate the effect it is having on that landscape. However, there are serious issues beyond the immediate or the issues of land and property rights. And we do not know at the moment whether HS2B, that is to say the section which goes up to Sheffield and Leeds, is ever going to happen. All we hear about 2B is that it may not happen. And furthermore, we hear very serious concerns about the project as a whole. We heard this morning on the radio from Lord Berkeley that the specification of speed was way beyond what it needed to be, and it was, I think, adding 30% to the costs. And speaking parochially perhaps, but for the rest of Leicestershire, what we're concerned about is not HS2B, but classic Midland line. That's what we're concerned about. We're concerned to get the electric line up from Sheffield down to London. And I think I was quite surprised when we were asked for £400,000 per annum to fund several offices. And now, of course, we have to have a bag carrier to go down to the meetings in London by Midland Main Line to follow the project. So I would just countenance, from my part, speaking as a Loughborough member, some caution in this and some focus remaining on classic Midland Main Line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. Mr Charlesworth, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, as the leaders mentioned, HS2, I think it's a dreadful idea and a shocking waste of public money. But the issue before us is the bag carrier. I mean, I have nothing against Mr Pendleton. I think he's a conscientious and hard-working councillor. No problem whatsoever with that. My concern is, and the remuneration panel make the point, that cabinet members are practically, they suggest that it's a practical full-time role. If we had some evidence that all cabinet members were doing, say, 40 hours a week, we might reconsider our position on support members. As we don't have that, we won't be supporting the appointment.
Thank you, Mr Charles. Mr Galton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Charles has made the point that in principle we don't support these because we don't really feel they're necessary, particularly in the times when budgets are so stretched. On the HS2 issue, it was ironic that on the same day that the Cabinet took the decision to allocate £400,000, they also made the decision to change the subsidy policy on public buses, which was exactly £400,000. So that, you are entitled to ask questions, that we can find money for some things, but we can't find money to support basic bus services. HS2 might bring some very positive, I don't know enough about it, whether it will, to a particular part. But public bus services affect the whole county. And as I say, it was just it looked bad that you voted to cut those bus services, and we know what the impact of that is going to be over the next few months, but you could find this 400,000, and now you can also find money for another cabinet support member who's presumably going to be quite busy because he's now going to have to write 2 annual reports.
Thank you, Mr Galton. Dr Ireland, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Labour Group do recognise the importance of mitigating the impact of HS2, which will drive through North West Leicestershire without stopping. But we do not, in principle, support the appointment of Cabinet support members, so we will not be supporting this motion.
Mr Chairman, I think it's extremely important that we have someone in this role to constantly be on top of all the meetings and all the correspondence and reports and information that comes forward to support our interests. The Development Corporation, which is going to be formed from this, will have immense powers when HS2 is driven across Leicestershire. What's 40 miles of railway, I think it is, and it will cut the county into 2 as the construction takes place. If we don't fight our corner and make sure that this work is done in an orderly way, to say nothing of the outcome and advantages or disadvantages of it in the long run, we could find that economic life and indeed social and every other part of life of this county is disrupted. And so that's why this post is so important, that we are constantly there maintaining our vigilance on this. And of course we may have to commission lawyers to fight our case when it comes to lobbying MPs and others, if they ever get around to constructive work again, when they look at this bill in detail, to make sure that there's nothing inside the small print, which is against our interests. That's why this is so important, and why Mr. Pendleton's the right man for the job. And I do regret, by the way, having to spend £400,000, but the cost of not doing it could be even greater to people's lives and well-being.
Mr. Rushton?
Just briefly, I can see we have no support for it, but apart from the administration, that is, it is the responsible thing to do to treat this with the seriousness that it deserves, not belittle it. If, as Max says, if HS2 is cancelled, unfortunately for Trevor, his job will be cancelled. So he is here specifically to deal with this. And obviously, he supports the electrification of the main line, as I do at all the meetings I attend. But also Trevor can go into bat for us to see if we can get classic compatibility on the HS2 line, which would be a huge bonus for Leicestershire and Leicestershire, Rutland and the city and all the people that use it, to get us up to Towton or to get us to the north quickly. Not all of us get on a train just to go to London. So it's important that we get Trevor in the room for all these events. And there are, I am not joking, there are just too many for me to go to every single one. It would be better to have a cabinet support member for myself dedicated to this issue with 3 officers reporting to him to run it correctly in the interests of Leicestershire. And if you want to know what he's doing, Trevor will be including it in his annual report, which is unlike some of your members, Simon.
Sorry, any member now wishing to speak, you've indicated too late. We've now had the summing up. So I've now got to put this to a vote. Clearly there are those in favour and those against. Could you raise your hands, please, for those in favour of this? Those against, please. Abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you. I now move on to agenda item number 10, notice of motion. Police funding, and that is Mr. Bill.
I suppose I'm ought to declare some sort of interest in this as a member of the old police committee. In fact, I think I'm the last remaining member of that, which of course met. No, the police committee. Oh yes, you see, I'm going way back when we met here, when we met along the corridor here, and we had the chief constable in here, and it was they were good days. And then I joined the police authority. I was there on the first day. I stayed all the time, and I was there when we were disbanded. Whether matters have improved since then is a matter of opinion, but there we are. So now we have this we have this position now where we're told by the chief constable and the commissioner that the force is going to be decimated because of the pensions situation, and that was reported in the Mercury, I believe, in the middle of November. And then a number of letters went backwards and forwards between the chief constable, the commissioner, and various members of this authority, if not all members of the authority, outlining the situation. And the situation is serious, of course, and it was the chief constable has drawn attention to the and the Commissioner drew attention to the Home Office, the Home Affairs Select Committee, which met on the 25th of October and outlined the general position over police funding, which is obviously dire. And then later, the Home Office itself wrote to the Chief Constable on the 21st of November, outlining the situation with the pensions, and it was quite clear that the cost of pensions is there's going to be additional cost of the pensions landing on the Chief Constable. And it was at that point, I think, when he went to town and informed the communities through the Mercury, and we all know what has happened since then. So we do face a serious position. I take the view, I might be unique in this, but I take the view that we should take an interest in what happens in all our public services, whether we are responsible here at County Hall or at borough level for them, or whether they are simply operated and we enjoy their services. And I'm talking, of course, not only the police, but also education and health. All these vital services are at least as vital as the services that the County Council is responsible for. They all impact on the people we serve, and the people we serve come to us when there are problems. Therefore, I think we really have a duty and a responsibility to take an interest. The Home Office Select Committee outlined themselves the situation as far as the lack of funding is concerned, and they referred to the fact that neighbourhood policing has been cut by over 20% since 2010. Recorded crime is up 32% in 3 years. Only a tiny proportion of online fraud cases are ever investigated. Child sexual abuse is on the increase, and the detection is nowhere near what we would all hope it to be. And the adoption of new technology is in an utter mess. These are not my words. These are the words of the Home Office Select Committee, which of course is, I would imagine, has all party backing. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I hope that you will support the spirit of the motion which is before us. The wording is taken, these are not my words at all, they are the words taken from the letter that we've all received from the Chief Constable and the Commissioner. They have been put into motion form by the officers here, and I'm grateful for their assistance, and I so move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Councillor Bill. Councillor Crooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to formally second the motion and speak to it if I may. Chairman, I would like to speak for the rural areas. Hinckley and Bosworth Council held their annual rural conference on Tuesday the 19th of November. One of the speakers was Emma Maxwell, our local police commander. In her submission, she advised delegates that she is losing 5 of her PCSOs and has no permission to re-employ any more. Emma went on to advise us that in Leicestershire the force are possibly to lose another 180 police, having already lost 500 since 2010. She has pleaded with parish councillors that attended the conference to contact their MP to enlist his support. During the discussion that followed, we were advised that rural crime had risen by 31% in Leicestershire, and as a rural member this obviously gives me great concern. So in seconding this motion, Mr. Chairman, I urge members to support this request. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome this motion. I think it's very important. I've been contacted numerous times over the past couple of months, 6 weeks, by people who have suffered crime of one form or another in my division. And it was gratefully received the letter circulated by our Police and Crime Commissioner that forms the basis of the motion. And I just wanted to draw one part and highlight one thing for members' awareness here, and that's to do with the sum of money and the monetary value. And it clearly states in the motion and in the letter that Leicestershire Police used to receive £134 million in 2010. Ignore what they receive now, but that 134 million, adjusted for inflation in today's money, would be nearly 167 million pounds. So if nothing happened and just the increases went up by inflation, that's a gap between 2010, what they received, and today of nearly 33 million pounds. So when you look at what they're actually receiving, that's a substantial amount of funding that's been cut from the police force. And then we wonder why crime is rising, we're losing police officers, which we can't replace, and detection rates are so low. So when we're talking about this motion, for or against, think about that. Think about what the Police and Crime Commissioner, the inspectors of police, are actually dealing with. And they're dealing with a lot of rising crime with resources nearly a third less than what they had in 2010. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Rhodes, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bell's spoken passionately about the funding of police, and of course he and I used to serve on the police authority.
Bill's motion, because
I shall be moving the amendment when I've done my opening remarks.
I'll let you take advice from the officers on that.
Mr. Rhodes, please, then make your speech.
Right. I move the amendment to this motion in my name and will be seconded in due course by Dr. Rynan. Mr. Bill and I served on the police authority for quite a number of years. I was only there for 9 years. He was obviously had much longer service. And during that time, there were many, many pressures on police funding. And each year we had to consider those matters and decide what to do, and sometimes recommend and take decisions on police precepts, which of course form part of the council tax. And every year, Mr. Bill used to vote against those increases. Every year. Even in 2007, when we had a very laudable proposition to increase the police budget by a substantial amount to take on another 200 officers in order to bring about a far more effective community policing structure. And we increased the press precept by 15.4%. Unthinkable today, isn't it? And in those days, we got together considerable support across the county for all this, just as Mr. Bill is trying to do now. And indeed, we actually went and finished up in London in front of John Healey, who was a local government minister, and Tony McNulty, a minister at the Home Office. And we took all our MPs with us. And every one of them spoke in our favour of this. That was people like Keith Vaz, Sir Peter Salisbury, who was an MP at the time, David Taylor, late David Taylor, Edward Garnier, not Sir Edward or Lord Garnier as he is now, and so on. And we had mixture, all the MPs backing us. And those were the days when they all backed Leicestershire. But that's not the case today, and there is considerable pressure. But I don't like the motion that Mr. Bill has brought, and the reason for the amendment is this, is that while we all support Leicestershire Police, this issue about pensions is something which is very vexed and may end up yet in the courts, and so we have to be very careful on what we say about it. I'm also concerned that we shouldn't comment about things which are happening in the short term. We should take a long-term and constructive view about policing. And to that end, therefore, I think that the amendment that I've put forward here actually addresses that in a more constructive way without actually going into the more pejorative and detailed aspects of policing, which I think are beyond our remit as county councillors. And therefore, I move the amendment.
Dr. Enion.
Thank you, Chair. I am happy to second this amendment. Whilst I supported the first motion and support Simon Cole and I support Willie Back, our PCC, in making representation to MPs, I'm afraid with Councillor Rhodes in wanting a long-term and constructive view. And here I want to echo the remarks made earlier by Councillor Sean Sheehan. Austerity is a choice. And if we are going to lobby Leicestershire's MPs, then we should be lobbying on behalf of not just the police, but also the fire authority and ourselves. Because austerity, as I said in my earlier speech, is having an impact on all our services, including those of the police, who are seeing an increase in crime, who are becoming the frontline mental health service in Leicestershire. And also because we need to be working together across these services. I have seen practical example of this in my own patch in Colville North, where we have a people zone which has been set up by the Police and Crime Commissioner, and where, as a very practical example of local area coordination, the fire officers to a meeting of the people zone brought evidence that we had a higher than average incidence of small domestic fires, often outside, and that these were probably due to people dumping mattresses and sofas, and they were doing that because of the high cost of bulky waste collections. So our local area coordinators coordinated a response, and this is actually taking place very soon, where they will be working together. The fire will be bringing a flatbed truck, they will be working with the waste collection service, they will be helping some of our poorer residents to get rid of those high-risk sofas and mattresses from their gardens. This is the kind of joined-up, constructive, long-term thinking that we need to be looking at. But we can't do this. We can't make these kind of things on a shoestring. There does need to be fairness in public funding, equity in service provision. We do need to focus on the importance of prevention. And so I am supporting this motion, and I want, with other members of this council, to urge Leicestershire MPs to actually support this council in accordance with the principles that have been set out in this motion.
Thank you, Dr. Arnott. Mr. Mullaney.
We clearly have a police force which is massively underfunded. We've heard about the rises in crime locally and the reductions in police finance. So we've got crime going up and police numbers going down. The challenge is that what's happening with our police services locally, being a lowly funded police force, is reflected in public services across the board in Leicestershire and more generally in the East Midlands, whether it's this county council having one of the lowest funded county councils in the country, meaning we're losing services having higher council tax, whether it's the NHS, where we're seeing cutbacks, whether it's education, where we have some of the worst financed schools, whether it's infrastructure projects, such as the Midland Main Line being cancelled at the same time as huge amounts of money are going to Crossrail in the south of England. The reality is that the East Midlands, and Leicestershire in particular, is always at the back of the queue when it comes to support from the government across a whole range of services, and of which the police is just one. And we have all Conservative MPs in Leicestershire. We have a government with no majority, and I wish they would use the leverage that they have to put pressure on this government to say, we were elected to represent the public of Leicestershire. The public of Leicestershire are not getting the levels of services they need on the police, education, health, transport, and so on. And it's about time they use that leverage to get our area the fair resources that it needs. I'm sorry that Labour couldn't support our unamended motion today, and that instead they supported a watered-down motion. It would have been good if they could have supported us. But, I mean, as with unitaries and reducing the council meetings, unfortunately, Labour increasingly seem to be backing the administration on a whole range of issues. I believe we need the original motion, which was a strong motion, calling on the government to deliver fair funding for Leicestershire Police so we get the services that our area needs.
Thank you, Mr Mullaney. Mr Orson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Quite interestingly, only this afternoon, like other members of the Police and Crime Panel, I've received a paper of the performance report, and it does indicate that if you look at quarter 2, 18-19, compared to the quarter 2 performance 17-18, the trend is an 8% rise in crime, which in numbers is 1,789. So that's quite a sobering thought, isn't it, when we first started talking? I listened to Councillor Bill and sort of my colleague Councillor Rhodes talking about their representation at the police. I too was on the police authority, but only joined in 2010. So I feel quite a newbie compared to David and Byron. But when the police authority was removed and replaced by the first elected Police and Crime Commissioner, Sir Clive Loader, in November 2012, I was elected to the chair of the Police and Crime Panel post. This is a post I enjoy and still hold to this day with support right across the political divide. Of course, this exposure has given me an insight into the governance of policing. And on the 10th of April last year, 2017, the Police and Crime Panel wrote to the PCC, Lord Bark, supporting his campaign for fairer funding for Leicestershire, Leicester City and Rutland policing. The panel noted the police officer numbers had reduced by 547 since 2009, a reduction of 23% of the force. We noted the LLR growth, population growth was more than the national average. We also noted Leicestershire received central funding per head of £113.37 compared to the national average of £121.30. And in 2006, there was one officer per 430 residents. However, last year, the number had risen to one officer per 599. Last week, the Home Office did write to the Chief Constable, indicating the Home Office have offered to contribute £2.1 million towards pension costs, which is about 40% of the estimated £5 million amount. However, this move would save around 50 officers, but still put at risk 130 officer posts. And if you look very closely at the £5 million figure, the maths suggests that the Chief and the PCC may be on the low side, and the estimated £5 million cost, to me, could look a little bit on the tad cheap side, shall we say. This £2.1 million is for 1 year only, and for 2021 and beyond, the comprehensive spending review will set the funding level for the police. Mr Chairman, I do fully support the amendment proposed by Councillor Rhodes and Councillor Inion, item 10, pages 7 and 8 on the Green Order paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Orson. Mr Galton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Joe's actually made a very good speech in favour of Mr Bill's motion, of underlining the serious situation that is the purpose of this motion. And, you know, Mr Rose says he doesn't want to talk about pensions. We're not looking to get into the legalities of that. We're simply looking to raise concern of the principle of switching something that historically has been funded from national taxation. The government's now saying it's going to be picked up from the local budget, which is just another example of shifting that. And your solution to this is to note that, well, the council tax might have to rise. I mean, this is just a belittling of the serious situation facing the police. And most members now don't go to parish meetings or local community meetings without this issue coming up. It used to be, you know, we very rarely see a police officer. Now it's, you haven't seen one for months in an area because they're having to focus on more serious crime, and the neighbourhood and community policing is suffering and is going to get worse. And, you know, the letter was very, very clear to the members of Parliament that appear again to be ignoring this cry. It's not crying wolf. In fact, the pension money, could well be the straw that breaks the camel's back. for policing, with a predicted further 180 officers lost on top of the 500 already lost in recent years. And I just think this amendment is inadequate, totally inadequate in its response. And of course the truth is that that side of the chamber can't bring themselves to support a motion put down by the opposition. They have to amend it. They have to make it their own. And really, that does not play well for consensus politics, which is what we're trying to achieve here. And actually, it would probably make it more difficult to get consensus on some of the other things that the leader wants to see consensus on, that he spoke about earlier in this meeting. So it's absolutely regrettable. There's nothing wrong with the motion that Mr. Bill has put forward. It seeks to raise concern. It seeks to support our Chief Constable and our Police and Crime Commissioner in raising this matter with the government. And we should be behind them in doing that and not putting forward a wishy-washy amendment.
Mr. Charlesworth, please.
Thank you, Chair. Simon's broadly outlined what I was going to say. The original motion composed with the help of officers based on comments by the PCC and the Chief Constable. They're all their comments. They're not our comments. This is not a political statement. All it needed was the support of this council. There are a lot of burning issues out there, but policing at the moment is a particular one. Lack of officers, lack of investigation, lack of court cases. And this, on its own, it didn't need it to be muddied with other fair funding issues. It really didn't. It will have more impact. Mr. Rose has shot himself in the foot. This would have had more impact, left alone, and got on with it. Loading it with other stuff has watered it down. It becomes meaningless and pointless. And Simon's right. I mentioned earlier to the leader, if we're going to work together and build trust, you could have left this alone. You didn't need to meddle with it. That's the sad thing about it. Just because we put it forward, we'll probably put another one forward at the next meeting. Let's see what happens with that. I'm pretty sure what the case will be. It's just so disappointing that this, based on professionals' views and comments, couldn't be left alone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Charlesworth. Ms. Newton, please.
I welcome the amendment moved by Councillor Rhodes. It's an improvement on the original Lib Dem motion and makes all the relevant points lucidly and succinctly. I think we could all agree that more funding is necessary if we are to provide our communities with effective policing. And in the light of this, I would actually caution against further reduction in staffing levels, in particular back office staff, as their presence is crucial in releasing police officers to concentrate on frontline policing. The figures outlined in the original motion are alarming. It's a cause for shame as well as concern that police numbers have fallen dramatically. Firstly, under a Liberal and Conservative coalition government in 2010, and subsequently under the Conservative government in 2013. So blame on all your houses. Yeah. It is quite, I'm speaking, thank you. It is quite irresponsible for the Home Office to make substantial cuts in the police budget without appearing to have any clear idea about the impact of these cuts. In short, the police are currently ill-equipped to deal with the unprecedented challenges facing the force in a fast-changing landscape. The decisions of the Home Office on policing are far too important to be left in the hands of the Treasury mandarins. One would think and fervently hope that a year from now we might not be discussing a service that has been described as being on the verge of crisis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Mr. Rushton, please.
Chairman, this is consensus politics. This motion has been agreed by the two senior political parties in the country. It has been run past the Police and Crime Commissioner. So just because we've not bothered talking to you doesn't mean it's not consensus politics. I did ask you to withdraw ours and support this one. So this is actually a prime example of consensus politics where the two senior parties agree a motion and we pass it. Can I also place on record my thanks to Joe as chairman of the Police and Crime Panel for the work he does. He's appointed by the County Council, so I thank him for the work he does. Can I also place on record my thanks to the District Councils who also appoint to the Police and Crime Panel for the work they do and the seriousness with which they treat it. And can I also place on record our thanks to the Leicestershire MPs, who Lord Back tells me he has met in London, has been to see the Minister, and all Leicestershire MPs do support this motion as well. So I want to place on record our thanks to the MPs. And also, I want to place on thanks to Byron for including the Fire and Rescue Service, of which you know I'm chairman, which will be equally affected by this as well. So this is why our amendment is consensus politics, and this is why you guys should, again, swallow your pride and vote for it.
Councillor Bill.
I find it sad that this has deteriorated. I did try to put something together based on my hope that we could back the police totally and without question. I'm sorry we had to hear about soggy mattresses. I really don't see what that's got to do with it. And I'm sorry that we had to hear about Gordon Brown's bank collapse, because that's how this country has got into the utter shambles it's in. Try not to throw eggs if you don't know what you're talking about. Now, I expected to be attacked from across there, and that's natural. What I find a little bit disappointing, though, is this reference to maybe subject to court proceedings. I submitted this motion some time ago, and I would have thought that if there was any question that there was any doubt about the legality of this motion, then the legal officers here or at police headquarters or at the Home Office or whoever it might be would have actually contacted me and said that is inadvisable. I have received no such warning from any quarter, and therefore I think we can discount little a as being the usual bluster that we have come to expect. That the County Council is not in a position to comment. If we cannot comment on the fact that we are now, that the people we represent are now suffering a 20% reduction in neighbourhood policing, that we're having a 32% increase in recorded crime, or slightly less if we take Joe's figures, but it is showing which direction we're going, that online fraud cases is increasing, and that our children are increasingly at risk through cybercrime, then what the devil are we here to do? We're here to defend people. We're here to represent people. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to continue to do so, despite all the brandishments from the people I've come to expect and the group here with whom I've got a great disappointment. I'm standing by my motion, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Chairman, and I shall continue to support the Chief Constable and the Commissioner in the good work that they are both doing.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. We all support the Chief Constable and the PCC. Now, I've had a proposal on the amendment. I've had a seconder. Those in favour of the amendment, please. Those against? Now, the amendment is carried. Now comes the substantive motion. Could I have a vote on the substantive motion, please? Mr. Bill, you have a right to come back on the substantive motion.
Nothing further to add. I'm speechless.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Thank you. That must be the first time, Mr. Bill. I have the substantive motion. Can I have those in favour, please? Those against? Abstain? Motion carried. Thank you all.